what we heard so far from the government team is that they think it is like the states, if states intervention could happen, that could lead to sort of uh, to harm the people, or maybe like it's their responsibility to protect the people. But okay, we're going to prove to you that we're going to prove to you in our speech how the state intervention is going to help protect the cultural aspect for the people. And in order to do that, we're going to have to answer a couple of questions here. Now, the first question that we have is like, what makes culture, or like, what makes individuality? What defines a country or makes it different from other countries? Well, it's obviously a group of stuff. First of all, you have the beliefs, maybe sometimes religion, and obviously culture. And what also makes culture is language. So basically, the heritage, the language, all of these things combined together makes an identity or make a group of people, and that's what differentiates countries from each other, right? So and also that we're going to talk to you about how does not protecting how not protected language is to affect the personal behavior on the personal level, and how does it extend to reach the whole society, society level. So what makes up a society values? Obviously, it's all these things that I have mentioned to you, but language is the main factor here. Language, you cannot just simply separate language from culture. So let's take an example. Let's take a look at like how does culture actually play a big role in a country's values and country's in specific, like against colonizers. Well, let's look for Morocco or all these countries who suffered in the past from colonization, where when we see like their languages getting affected by foreign languages, what actually happens is that people feel disattached from the language. So speaking in different languages, that is the first step. But the second step, what happens is that they culturally start forgetting certain stuff, because they start talking in different languages. They start forgetting what makes up their individuality and what makes up the society. So what actually happens, for example, as I mentioned to you in Morocco with the occupation, is that when people lost their languages, they are no longer a key factor for these, especially disadvantages with their dying languages, because they're affected by colonization. Their key factor and their key weapon for defending any colonization or for protecting their country is mainly focused on protecting their culture. Because if you want to keep your country safe, if you want to prove to outer countries that you're an independent country, you have to take the cultural aspect as an advantage, as yeah. So as I mentioned to you the example of Morocco, telling you that a person will feel less attached to the culture because language makes up a huge part of the culture. But also, let's take a look at the social behavior, and how does the personal level affect this whole social level. So let's talk about, for example, as a Palestinian. I mean, what what makes me different, what makes me feel like I can defend what's happening in Palestine and like deliver a message, is basically my culture and my individuality of having that language. So taking that and applying it to all these colonized countries where they suffer on low level, where they're dying languages, where they're forgetting these dying languages, and they're getting more involved in like speaking the majority language. If the state does not do anything to help people, encourage them to be attached to their own culture, to be attached to their own language, defend that. If the state doesn't do that, then these people will feel less attached. They will start forgetting the real cause. They'll start forgetting what makes their country different, and their culture even might start changing when they start like getting involved in different languages. But for example, like in Palestine, we have specific words that relate to our heritage in our Arabic Palestinian languages. So these specific words, these small words, if we keep on teaching our children to speak up and to be proud of their culture and and their own languages, we're basically telling you can go ahead and you can defend your country this way, and without a state, without the state doing whatever possible to do that, we believe that people will they will get involved in in these new the old heritage and the old culture. Yes, go ahead.
So I think the link, which is sort of missing here, right, is like why it's necessary that the state needs to take actions here in order for the language to be protected. Like, why is it that if people would find these sort of like these cultural ties so appropriate, that they wouldn't continue to practice this language themselves, like amongst their immediate social groups of their family?
Okay, so you're basically saying, why do we need a state? Okay, so let's look at Morocco. Because the state maybe not do enough intervention, what we see nowadays is that their culture is being erased a bit by bit, and they're getting more and more mixed into the different cultures. While we agree that diversity is good, but what makes diversity is the existence of these different languages. Well, here's the thing: people, especially new generations, especially like with teenagers, they don't really care that much unless we make them care, or at least we show them what's really important. For example, in Palestine, like if we don't have a state intervention, here's what's going to happen. People and teenagers, the new people, will start forgetting a bit by bit, and the generation after generation, they will no longer be attached to the real values. And as I mentioned to you before, there are specific words in our languages that relate to, as I mentioned before, like events, or maybe events from occupation, or events from specific cultural aspects. These small words, these are really relatable to kids if we teach them that, if we teach them their language. And I give you this example for you to imagine it and to apply it on, as I mentioned before, colonized countries. So that's it. Okay, so let me just move on. So um, let's agree on one thing: the state is definitely responsible for that. Okay, thank you. Thank you for that. I am proud to oppose. Thank you.
Okay. So as my partners mentioned, we agree that there are benefits of bringing back dying language, and we do not deny that language has certain role in a culture of a community itself. But we do not think that it is a responsibility of the state to do it themselves, and that this action of intervention will only cause counterproductive effect on bringing back the language. So a few points of a rebuttal. So basically, OO has mentioned a lot, has said a lot about what kind of a language and beliefs and religions can do to such a culture, to such an identity, but they have failed to address that. Why is it such an important that bringing back a dying language will kind of play a function in the working in a function of a society in general. So they've mentioned that in the past, languages play an important role in fighting against colonizer and certain occupations that they wouldn't have. Well, we think that these cases in which they made, they made a pretty big case on the languages that are rare but not technically dying. So why are these languages dying? Because it belongs to a really small ethnic group that they don't technically serve any big economical or political purpose within their bigger community. And in many cases, these languages have already have their own replacing language, so that they can use in everyday life and in their work and other sides. So the languages that are dying, they only use within their families. So they have a cultural value, but it's quite trivial to what is in this case. Yeah.
Why do you think these cultures and having these languages are so small at the current era? What do you think happened to them in the last couple of 100 years that led to this certain status that their own language is dying?
I see what you're getting there. You might probably want to point out that this is kind of like a state fault that this language is dying because of colonizing effect or whatever, that since it's the state fault, it might be their moral responsibility to relive this kind of language. Well, that we don't think that bringing back the language by the state helping people to bringing back the language will ever do this, will kind of do this effect in which they can redeem themselves, but it would actually cause a flashback to the bigger the other community that they're dealing with. So people will start raising questions like, why, what does it in it for them that you're helping this little community in reviving their language while it doesn't do anything to a whole society purpose? No. So our point is, if the language that you've spoken of have proven to have so much power in whatever they're doing, they would have lived. And so because of these so for example, like the Finnish and the Swedish languages, they have historical impact. They're now in their political relation, and people are still working between these countries. That's why it's served, it's there as a state incentive to be there, because it serves some kind of purpose, right? So for example, if Vietnam, they have 54 different ethnic groups and nearly like 100 different small languages that they're learning within their community, and if some of them just die, nobody actually care and nobody would have known, and like bringing back would have no use other than that kind of little community themselves know it. So bringing up to our point that there's no principal responsibility in the state to do it, and the second one is that the fertility of the exercise. We believe that the state will inherently do a bad job in this because they don't know what else to do, what kind of role these languages play with the people, and then they would not have the right incentives. Instead, they could fund these small communities so that these people will do whatever it takes to keep the languages alive, rather than having like a nationwide incentive to teach the language that nobody even know and nobody even care, and they don't know what for. So then it would send kind of resentment to other people, to the larger community, as to why is the government doing this while they have better things to do. So it would create like a less force on everyone else, that just that they didn't have to listen to the government and kind of bring them back these dying languages. So basically, we agree on the importance of bringing back dying languages, but it can be solved in other ways, in the ways that will benefit everyone and everyone who cares, but not the state. Thank you.
So before going to our arguments and rebuilding on my teammate argument, I have a couple of rebuttals for the team. The government team. So you brought this example of Philippines and how they have like 100 cultures, and they have those beautiful diversity, and you just like said, oh, like if a language died, what's the importance if like one language or two died? Well, you're killing the diversity, the beauty of this languages on those countries. We're in this team, our main principle is to actually celebrate the beauty of diversity of all these languages, to protect minorities, and that's what I'm going to explain in my arguments. But the most important thing is that how those Philippine people, it would be like those languages are not just like language. If a language is lost, there is a culture is lost with it. There's a historical details that are lost with it. There are songs that are lost with it. There's like their mom, their grandparents' recipes are lost with it. So basically, we're here celebrating the diversities, and your argument, your example of Philippines is just like it's not in your side because you're just killing the diversity of those things. And the other thing is that it will create less force if the state does not like pay attention to these things to actually protect these languages. Well, actually, how is that even going to like create like a pressure on the government? Like protecting language is not a very big process. It's not like creating a nuclear weapon. It's just like it's very small steps, but it's very important that to keep standing for those people to say that this culture, no, like I'm here, I belong, I have this history, I have this culture, I have this amazing thing that distinguish me from other people. But it's not going to create that force on governments. Actually, government has a lot to do from having these things on creating more stuff on paying too much money on healthcare, on education, protecting those languages. I'm not seeing anything that it's going to create like a pressure on the government. So moving to my before moving to my arguments, I'm going to talk about how it will strengthen minorities against first fold is fights against occupation, capitalism, and other thing fighting against racism in one argument, which is strengthen the minorities. But before that, I'm going to build on my my partner's argument about diversity. So we're answering an important question here. Why diversity is important, why it's important to protect our language, our culture. So first of all, we're saying that a language is not like a way of just like, yeah, I have a language and I'm just, it's not just a way of talking. It has a lot of specifics. It has a history of this, like this country. It has like a lot of ancestors. They have a lot of historical details, a lot of traditional songs, traditional recipes. If those things, if this language is lost, all the details, all the historical details are lost with that. All the beauty of diversity, that the thing that says, oh, I'm a culture and I'm a culture and I distinguish myself from this another culture. The beauty of diversity, we are killing this beauty. Why? Because like, yes, my like language is not as important as other languages, not as like big as like an English, for example, language, or it's just like not as important as we're killing a lot of this beauty of the history of this culture. We are killing cultures, as I said. It's just not about languages. Killing language will lead to killing culture, as I said, as I explained on how it's going to kill all these small beauty things. I don't have to, I'm going, okay, go but fast.
Okay. So, like, I understand a lot of your analysis here is to, like, the beauty of diversity and the beauty of different cultures, right? But if you find that people in the communities are, like, not really valuing this to the extent that they are able to sort of keep these languages and cultures going, then isn't it a little bit patronizing for government to, like, then tell them that, like, no, you need to be doing this, like, protection of language and community?
Yes. Okay. So that's what I'm going to answer in my next argument. there is certain countries that are facing the danger of incubation, the danger of capitalism, the danger of capitalist countries, or these countries that wants to actually intervene in the country and just destroy their culture and take the advantage of everything. So basically, if we are not protecting those, like even if some of the people don't care, it's important because like it's a fight against those, it's a fight to protect them, because if there was like an like or someone who wants to control their country, it's important to save their culture, to save their language, to strengthen those minorities, or if they're a poor country and they're going to be like you know uh, how is it, a minority in this like situation. It's important that keeping the culture, keeping their language, keeping their history is a strength for them against these things. And I'm going to explain this in my argument, which is strengthen the minorities. So basically, there's a lot of states that are having occupation from bigger states. Like what happened before, after the World War II, when France occupied Morocco, occupied Algeria. Those countries, those capitalist countries, just came and destroyed the Arabic language. Arabic language is not one of the important languages in the world, was going to vanish in those countries. It was dying back then. And now a lot if you see like Algerian and Moroccan have this weird like Arabic accent, or they fix stuff like with French language. But when they stood for their language, they stood for their culture, they stood for everything, that gave them a very important, that gave them a strength fight against France and finally find their liberation. But also, it's a fight against racism, because for instance, if their language died, they would say like those minorities have no language, they don't have a culture, their culture has been for a long time. But when they have saying, no, I have this and this and this, I have history, I have language, I existed, that says yes, those minorities are existing, they have the right as to live as you, and that will strengthen them in the further in the dangerous time, or when they face racism or occupation, or those so to summarize everything, we're saying that yes, to protect those languages. Why? Because we're celebrating diversity. We're celebrating the beauty of, we're celebrating the beauty of this diversity, and actually we're strengthening those minorities against occupation, against racism, and we're strengthening them. And for those all reasons, I was happy to oppose. Thank you.
First of all, we reject the definition of the member of the government as dying languages isn't just languages spoken less than 50% in the nation. We define them as clearly implied by the word dying in the motion as languages that need intervention to prevent their extinction. I would like to start my speech with rebuttals for the opening government. First of all, why are we debating this now in English? Why are we not debating it in Arabic, French, or Russian? Well, it's because the British colonized most of the world, spreading their languages on the behalf of other languages. So only separated languages are saying that, so you only separated languages as saying that other languages are not as important only because they didn't invade and colonize enough countries to dominate, to enforce their language as dominating. So we see this point of view as faulty and unjust. We believe in the opposition that no human culture or language is superior to any other, as no human is superior to another. And people don't just decide to live by themselves to switch their languages. That is much of a faulty claim as saying that slavery was a choice. This language is dying because of years of suppression and abuse, economically, racially, or even military, by colonizing nations over the years. Minorities of Native Americans are massacred. Anyone who would deny the imperialistic white man what he wants in the decade of colonization would lose their lives, their language, and their culture. Today, many English Americans are still hostile towards non-English speakers, especially Spanish ones. Last August, a linguistic in China was arrested for trying to open a school that taught his native language, and he was not heard from since. So we believe this is a huge problem that we should debate now. The government way of dealing with this minorities is not different than the capitalist point of view of valuing heritage by the net worth of this minority and how much they contribute to the economy. And we think this is very problematic. As taking the point of view, we believe that everyone and their culture is equally important. Now, this would lead to my first argument that for advancement of the nation, we need to respect minorities' heritage. Every nation is composed of majority minority. The majority usually can have most of the wealth of this nation. Now, if we, by the actor here, government, believe that by protecting these languages and uplifting it from the majority, the citizen will understand that there are people who are different, as the country enforce laws to protect the languages of people who don't speak the majority's language. Their heritage is being protected. And when the state does that, it will enforce acceptance and harmony between different groups in this nation, reducing the internal separatism and internal conflict. This is basically fighting racism, distributing a general sense of nationalism. And when this country enforces the ideas of accepting differences, we get a very tolerant nation that all parts of the society together facing any internal or external threat. And we can have a clear example of this in the state of Oman. This state is like stationed between huge countries of Shia and Sunni nations, and by applying strict rules to prevent any kind of religious problems or conflict, this is one of the most stable nations in the Middle East. Now, further, let alone the involvement of the nation productivism, expertise, labor force, brain power, heritage will be preserved, not mentioning that cultural variation and biodiversity. Now, why this is very important? Because this is one of the most important factors for attracting tourism. People like to go to a country to see the diversity of cultures. They would be attracted to nations that hold different things to present, that have huge cultural rich history to present to these tourists. So that's why this would lead to a huge income for any nation that would actually protect their minorities' languages and would protect their existence as a minority, as the minority is also defined by the language. Having this heritage and culture protected will lead to huge amounts of income by the tourism to the country. Now, my second extension is that it's a responsibility of this language. Most language heritages are dying because of direct and indirect effects of imperialism and colonization. And my partner will further explain this. And an important argument I would like to add here, that what will happen if we don't protect these languages? Well, clearly implied by the motion, the language will be extinct. Now, why do we believe that is bad? Because first of all, we will lose understanding of all the people and their history will be lost to all humanity, because we can't understand that. We can't benefit that anymore because we lost their languages. Their language, all the art soul was written down in magnificent poetry will be lost, as humans will lose a part of their race forever. As people dying, they don't really die. As when a nation loses people, they're not dying because their culture is continuing. And one of the key factors of preserving the continuity of any group of humans is preserving their culture for the next generation. We as humans don't just vanish. We shouldn't let groups of people vanish. This is immoral, and this is something that we believe would lead to huge problems inside the country. And no culture has a monopoly on a human genius. And we never know when the next brilliant idea comes from. If we actually marginalize these communities and not allow them to be a part of our nation, we might lose a huge amount of brain power, as humanity does, because when people just switch their languages, they just don't get as creative as they are with their own languages. I'm a second English speaker. I'm not a native English speaker. And I think in Arabic way more brightly, more clearly and easily than I do in English. So why would I change the language, as I can be more creative in my own native language? You are forcing them no, thank you. You are forcing them to change their language also because of the economical factors. The colonization and imperialism didn't just kill the nations and made the numbers shrink. The also important part are indirect ways of killing these languages is by taking away their wealth, their land, the factors of prosperity, implying unfair tariffs and unfair trade deals. And basically, yeah, I'll take your point.
So, like, it's perfectly possible to give the communities like a level of self-determination, like give them funding so they're able to like function as a community? Like, why is it that specifically the government needs to take steps to protect the status of the language within the territory of the country as a whole?
Well, that's a very important point because no one else can do it as effectively and as the government. First of all, we believe it's the government responsibility to do that. We believe they had a huge amount of contribution to the status that these people are in at the moment by years of segregation, suppression, and marginalization. This is one factor that they're responsible to do that. The second factor is basically no one can do that. The member of government, I believe, said that it's not equal, where they're like, it's not making up for the bad things that happened to them. Well, true, but it's the best thing we can do for now. We did the fault in the back. We can't just say, okay, we're never gonna make it up to them, and so we should stop doing anything. Well, that's basically doing more wrong to them because we should try to help them as soon as we can. And thank you all for listening.
Okay, in my speech, I will explain why we kind of beat all the tables, but first I will going to start with the rebuttal. Okay, so that the whole point about the colonization and the massacres and the, but you should understand that economic development that these countries have, the technological development that this country has, and everything that these countries have, maybe is a result of some developed countries coming to these countries. The colonization, they are spreading they're spreading their culture, and because of that, such countries as India and such countries which were the part of as a colonized part, even the Kazakhstan, which was the colony of the Russian Empire, we have this economic development. We have all this development thanks to that countries. And in this point, we should evaluate what is more important: preserving the country and not being developed, but maybe somehow they sacrifice some part, but still have development, still have an opportunity to achieve their goals, still have an opportunity to be a scientist, still have an opportunity to realize their dreams. That is much more important in that case than saving the culture and maybe not developing. Also, the whole point about the and without this, we wouldn't have this debate if we wouldn't have English language as an international. If everybody was fighting for their language, we wouldn't have this debate. And language on this, okay, I will explain this point later. And also about the having this creativity on their language, we are not saying that we are going to destroy minority languages. We are not saying that we somehow will do something so that languages won't develop. We are saying that we're saying that state should not be doing this. We still have enthusiasts, we still have businessmen, we still have other funds that are fighting for the minority language, and minority languages still has
PRI.
Please no. No, thank you. Okay, we are saying that we're saying that we still in both worlds we have the improvement of minority language, but in our world this is done not by state, but this is done by other people. And okay, I will explain why it is not good for the state to fight to protect these minority languages. To protect the minority languages, to do somehow that the minority languages will be preserved, there should be a lot of work done, because having one family saying in that language, it's not the kind of thing that we will preserve this language. We need to have a lot of people to do that, and this costs a lot of money, this costs a lot of resources, and which means that it's difficult to preserve. And there is no guarantee that this language will be preserved, and there's no guarantee that all the things that a state will do in the future will have an effect, will help to preserve. And that therefore we are saying that it is more important for the state. It is not cost wasting for the state to spend these resources to another alternatives. We have, for example, maybe the development of English language. And what my partner was trying to explain is that diversity in when the minority languages are developing, this may cause the backlash, and it is true because the backlash, no thank you, but backlash are happening between these minorities, and maybe when they know that their language is important, their language is protected by state, they might have this idea that their language is higher than the other, and this causes the misunderstanding between them. And what my partner was trying to say is that when we, if the state will be spending these resources to other stuff, for example, we are not saying that it is the 100%, but for example, English language, people will have more opportunities to develop. People will have more opportunities to integrate in the international community. They have more opportunities to achieve in science. They will have more opportunities to achieve the peace on the international level. And all these opportunities are more beneficial for the state than not guaranteed things that we'll have when we will try to preserve the minority language. And what differs us from opening government, they are trying to explain that it is not state's responsibility to preserve the language, but we are saying maybe it is state's responsibility, that we're explaining, and we're beating the best case of opposition when they're saying that state should protect. We are saying that it is not beneficial for the state. Maybe it's their responsibility, but they will choose not to do that just because it is not beneficial, and maybe it is more beneficial for the people not to do so. In the response to opening opposition, what we are trying to say that we still don't understand why culture is important, because the culture, the language is not the thing that united people when they were trying to fight somebody to fight in the war. What they are trying to save is themselves. They are trying to save their lives. And they're trying to say their territory. It is not, no thank you. It is not the things that are connected with culture. With what we believe that in such extreme cases like war, like occupation, like intervention, the thing that motivates people to fight is their own life, their own family, not the culture. No, they are trying to preserve themselves, and as human beings they understand that preserving themselves will be just by uniting, and therefore they are fighting, not because that they have one language. Summing all this stuff, we are saying that we are staying higher than OG because we worked with the best case of opposition. We are staying over OO because we provided the rebuttal for their cases, and we think that they still don't explain why culture is good, because we are saying that the culture is not the necessary stuff that unites people. And we are saying that we are beating CO because we are saying that all the stuff that has been done by European countries are worth it, because they now have economic development, and we may have more economic development if we continue to do so, and we still have in our world something to will help this the minority language to survive. Thank you. Proud to propose.
So I will rebuttal what was mentioned by the opposition, the government, through explaining the clashing points throughout this debate. So from what I've heard, we have two clashing points. The first one is whether it's the country's responsibility or the state's responsibility to protect these languages. What we heard from the opening government is that people's responsibility to protect their own languages is what we should focus on, meaning that people are responsible for their language and not their state. What we have to say to that is that, first of all, people cannot protect their own languages. Governments can provide rules, laws to protect those people. But those people on their own have nothing to protect them from people stopping them from speaking their languages, from people being racist against them for speaking their languages. And this is why the state has a big or a huge responsibility over protecting those people. The second thing is, this falls under the under reparations. Speakers of minority languages suffered for a long time from persecution. For example, Native American children were not allowed until the end of the 20th century to speak in their own native languages in Canadian and American schools. We see examples like this. This is the cause for these languages to become indigenous and to become to begin to die, and other languages to conquered these languages. One other thing, the second clash point was that is it beneficial for the country or diversity? Is diversity good? And this is a very crucial point, because what we see from government throughout this debate is them saying that it's not beneficial for the state itself to spend an amount of money or to spend their efforts trying to protect these languages. And what I heard from the whip right now is that the state should focus on other things like science, because it brings no benefit to focus its energy on protecting those languages. Closing government mentioned that it sorry, 1 minute. Closing government mentioned that it increases racism and creates barriers, as mentioned by the closing government. As mentioned by the closing government, that diversity is bad for people, that there is no connection between the citizens of a country if we support these languages. Opening opposition explained the cultural importance, and I would like to expand on this a little bit because it has a huge impact. Languages are more important, are more than vocabulary and grammar. Language is a way to convey a community's songs, stories, poems, and cultures. Why is this important? Why we should preserve these things? Because for people, this creates a feeling of recognition. This creates a feeling of being valued by their own state, which creates loyalty. One other thing is that this creates an understanding and actually less racism between the people. People will start to see that we are different. This country has a lot of different cultures and a lot of different people, and we should protect them. We should work with them instead of being racist and stopping them from using their own languages, and we should support them to use their own languages. Now, 1 second. Okay, now, what did my partner tell you about the benefit it will bring to the country? Just like we spend millions to save animals and biodiversity in nature, although some of them seem like they do not have that great of a benefit for human beings, although we know it provides a wealth of services to human beings, it's the same with languages. Languages are ripe with possibility. They contain accumulated body of knowledge for geography, mathematics, navigation, astronomy. And I would like to quote this from my partner: "No culture has a monopoly on human genius. We lose ancient knowledge by losing these languages. We are sacrificing a huge potential for evolving, for moving forward in science and even in our social life if we let those languages die. Other than depriving people from their cultures and from what they believe in most, we are putting this limit on what our country can do and how much it can progress." So overall, the government failed to see the importance of those languages and the diversity it brings. And here on opposition, opening up opposition explained to you the cultural and social importance of these languages and what do they bring to their own people, while we expanded on that thought and provided the benefits of states preserving those languages when it comes to progression in science. Okay, go ahead.
So, I mean, you've illustrated in your case that there seems to be like a lot of benefit to sort of protecting these languages. This is great, right? But like, what's then to say that people aren't going to be incentivized to protect these languages on their own volition? And like, why is it that we need the state to do it? I think this is something that really hasn't been answered by your question.
I did answer that, and I would like to repeat my answer. It's because a lot of people cannot protect their own languages. A very funny example for this is Kim Kardashian came out with this palette, eyeshadow palette, with names from the Hawaii language. And people from Hawaii, because they value their language so much, thought it was very offensive to them and to their own language. However, they were not able to change this. They were not able to go to the court and hold a strong case against what she did, although they think that this does not, or this should not represent their language. Their language should not be used this way. They had no way of protecting or defending their own language. Now, so as I was saying, we explained to you the cultural importance, the social importance, and what it brings to the state and the country overall. So why are we winning this debate? Because government had a very narrow-sighted view of languages. They failed to see the importance of these languages. And although opening opening opposition talked about the cultural importance, we explained to you how this benefits the country and how it benefits the people overall. So the stakeholders we brought to this debate are inclusive or more inclusive than what the opposition brought to you. Thank you.